Welcome to On the Issues. I'm your host, Nicholas Ballasy. For this week's show, we're in the studio with the New Jersey State Treasurer, David Rousseau. To start off, how did you get into public service?
As a senior in college, I decided to do an internship in government. I resumed all of Trenton and other places, in Washington and some other places, and I was able to get an internship at a small agency in Trenton called the Election Law Enforcement Commission, which then turned from an internship to a paid position. And I would say that probably when I started, I didn't, expect to be in government for now almost 25, actually about 25 years now. I liked it. I moved up the ranks from the small agency I was at to moving into the state senate to moving on to where I am now. Other positions I've had in previous administrations to where I am now, and it's just always, the political science aspect, history, public service always interested me, but I think what really got it was, I got lucky enough to get an internship in a place that I really liked. That internship turned into something long term, that eventually led to where I am today. So I actually started from an unpaid in I guess the spring of 1982. In 1982, I started as an unpaid intern all the way to where I am now 25 years later. So it's an interesting road.
How did you position yourself for the appointment of state treasurer?
I think that probably I never really, thought that I would want to be or would ever be state treasurer until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. But starting in the late '80s, I joined the Senate Democratic staff in the legislature, and I was assigned as then to help the person who was the budget director for the staff, basically who analyzes the governor's budget, and as the legislature makes their changes to it. That person then left in 1991. I became the budget director at that point in time. Through the 1990s, even though we were then not in the majority anymore, we were in the minority, I became more of a go-to person on fiscal issues, of budget issues. And then when Jim McGreevey became governor in 2002, he asked me if I'd join his administration as deputy state treasurer to, in essence, run the budget operation. And I guess that at that point in time is probably the first point in time I thought about, well, maybe someday I would like to cap my career by being treasurer. I stayed with Jim McGreevey for 3 years, for his 3 years of governorship, did Cody for 1, left for a little while, and went to figure out what I wanted to do. What I ended up wanting to do was the Governor Corzine asked me to come back, and so I left for about 6 months with Governor Cody in 2006. Governor Corzine in August of 2006 asked me if I wanted to come back in to be his primary advisor on the budget. Then the treasurer's position opened up, and I expressed interest in it, and that's where I am today. It's it's been an interesting ride. The last 6 or 7 years has been really interesting.
What kind of work did you do before actually working with budgets in government that would prepare you for this kind of position?
Well, I think what really happened was at that internship at the Election Law Enforcement Commission, and then stepped into a more of a permanent position there. I dealt with a lot of reviewing of campaign finance reports. I've always had a math acumen, but I also then developed, my analytical skills. I'm not,
right.
You don't need to be a great, we have tons of people who are accountants and et cetera like that in government. My role is to help develop policy and move through the other pieces. If you just need the analytical mind, and you need common sense, you need political common sense. Political in a small p and a big P, both on a partisan basis and on a nonpartisan basis. What's going to fly with the people? What's going to fly with legislators? Because their most important thing in getting a big budget done is to be able to get 41 votes and 21 votes in order to pass it. If you can't do that, you don't have it. It doesn't matter how good of a budget you have. If you can't get that, it doesn't matter. And I think over that decade from 1991 through 2002, I think I really developed a relationship in the legislature and a reputation about somebody who usually, even though I was in a partisan office, the Democratic office, I was always somebody who developed a reputation of playing it straight, telling the truth, and then that carried forward, through the McGreevey years, and then I think it also was one of the reasons why the governor asked me to do this. He realized that I had, as we're going into these tough fiscal times, and it's
right.
Good to have somebody who has that relationship with the legislature and understands where they're coming from and understands their needs to try to balance off the two and be a bridge between the two. And I think that's what I've been the last 6 out of the last 7 years, has been that bridge between the executive branch and the legislative branch.
So what is an average day in the life of the state treasurer?
It varies. A couple weeks ago, my average day was spending 4.5 hours before legislative committees 3 days in a row, defending the governor's budget. Today it was addressing a group of kids at 10 o'clock this morning for Take Your Children to Work Day. Our department hosted an event over the War Memorial. I then had some internal meetings. I probably at least 2 or 3 times a week I'll have meetings with the governor. I probably talk to the governor at least 1 or 2 times a day on the phone. I'm probably in the office until what ends up happening is you're in meetings all day long, so you don't have a chance to even catch up on the reading or anything else that's happened during the day until late in the day. So the end of the day, which would normally be about now, I'd be catching up on my reading for the day, and then I'll do whatever. I have the advantage of only living 15 minutes from the office, so what I do is I take a lot of work home, and I may go home for a couple hours, decompress, and then pick up my files at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So that's sort of a typical day. Yesterday was even a day where I started off at 7:30 in the morning at the Meadowlands for a tour of the new facilities up there, editorial boards with the governor later in the day, and then a dinner in New York last night with people who buy our bonds. So it was a really contrast between last night having dinner with people from Wall Street professionals, and then this morning at 10 o'clock, doing an introductory to a group of kids ranging from 5 to 15 years old.
Moving on to some specific issues, what are your thoughts on Governor Corzine's effort to pay down the debt, balance the budget, and be fiscally responsible?
I think it took courage for him to go out there. As we all know, anybody who went to any of the town halls or read anything about the town halls, his plan was not widely accepted. It was some of the town halls got very nasty. Some of them were all of them were tough. Some of them were tough but respectable. Some were tough but nasty. But it's a situation where we've gone too long. We've gone 10 or 15 years with just trying to come up with ideas and I was part of those budgets. But as my role in those budgets was to follow the direction of my governor or the legislator to say, look, this is what we want to do. We won't want major pain. We want you to figure out how to get to the next year. And we went we kept on doing it too many times. And this governor has basically said, no, I'm going to draw a line in the sand right now. We're not going to start spending more money than we bring in, and we're going to reset our finances this year. He's reset, turning point, number of catchphrases he's used, and at the same time we do that, we've got to start thinking long term more, and we've got to think about a way to pay down our debt, and we've also got to figure out a long term way to take care of our infrastructure, mainly our roads, bridges, mass transit, etc. This state is dependent on. As any of you students know, their parents know that, this state is a state where you need a car and you need good roads and you need to be able to get around this state. And I think it was tough. I mean, sitting through some of those town halls and hearing what the people were saying was tough. But I think that the one thing I've seen in Trenton now is that 6 weeks of discussion of these issues have made people think twice about. They may not totally accept his plan, but they all now recognize the problem, and I think we see a different attitude from the legislature this year, recognizing that over the next 8 weeks as we develop a budget, that they're not going to look to short-term fixes. They're going to really look to long-term issues to make sure that we really turn this budget around.
A constant theme that I see in the press is people say, does this governor care about his reelection? Have you heard him say anything about his future political aspirations as far as another term? Is he concerned?
It's not my role to, but I mean, he clearly, he's going to do what he believes is right. And if the people, if he runs, when he runs, I'll see either way. And if the people in 2009 don't agree with what he did, but if he believes that he did the right thing, I think at the end of that next day, whatever that day is after the election, that he'll feel good. That that he at least tried to set the finances in order. If the people don't accept it, that's the democracy we live in, and that's the electoral process we live in. People that's their right to do that. But I think that he's had the courage to go out there and say, this is what we need to do. We need we hear at the town halls, cut government, cut spending, cut. But again, every time you decide to cut something, there's a constituency that wants that. That things just didn't happen. Things just don't appear in the budget because they just appear. They appear because someone advocates for them or there's some need. So the minute you decide to take one of those away, there's going to be people outcrying, from whether it's the smallest cut of eliminating the Department of Agriculture for $500,000 to reducing higher education funding by roughly $100 million, by reducing rebates by over $500 million. No matter what it is, and in between, there's a constituency for every one of those, every one of those groups. But I think that that people have at least, I can remember past years where governors have made those types of reductions, and we'd have rallies out on the State House steps every day. I think even the public is understanding right now that they may not like the cuts, but I think they realize that what, maybe we have to live with it for a while, because the number of rallies and everything are not nearly as many as you would have expected with the wide range of reductions that we've made in this budget.
Well, the other side of it is, hey, someone has to do it.
Right.
So he's stepping up to the
He's
plate.
stepping up to the plate.
Doing it.
He's basically saying, I'm not going to go another. Look, could he have said to me, find a way for me to get through two, three more budgets with
right.
the magic you've done in past years or something like that? Yeah, but it wouldn't be fair to the future citizens of the state, the future public elected officials, and at some point in time, somebody's got to say, enough is enough, and stop, and we'll draw the line in the sand. And that's what he's done. And like I said, I also think that that both parties in the legislature have come to agreement. You know what? That we may not agree with every single one of his cuts, but we agree with this concept that we can't spend more than we bring in. We agree with this concept that we need to figure out how to reduce debt, and we agree that we're not going to spend more than roughly $33 billion. Within that, can there be changes? Yes, but they're not going to be. There won't be significant changes.
Was there ever a specific part of the budget where he said he wants this done, and you came back and just said we can't do it?
No, this year I don't think so. I think that there were areas that we, the combination of the governor, me, other senior staff in the governor's office, I think we always hashed things out, but ultimately when he made a decision and he's decided, no, I'm not going to do it. In fact, I'm not going to say what it was, but today we said, do you want to do, what about this? And he just said, no matter what you do for the rest of this 8 weeks, I'm not doing that. That he's ultimately the one, as I said before, on the electoral question, he's the one whose name that goes on the ballot. Right. My name doesn't go on any ballot. His name goes on the ballot, and he's the one that ultimately he's the boss.
So what is your role specifically in the budget process?
Well, as Treasury is the lead agent, and the Treasurer is the lead person in developing the budget with the assistance of a great staff at the Office of Management and Budget. We put together different scenarios for the governor in working with the rest of the cabinet on different scenarios on, okay, if you want to, here's $3.5 billion worth of potential cuts. Now let's pick the 1.8 or 1.9 billion dollars that you want to do that fits into your priorities. If you say that this, and if you still can't come up with, after that list we gave you, we still don't come up with it. No, we go back to the drawing board. So that's where and then after he develops his budget, it's being the defender of it. It's being the defender of it in front of the legislature. I mean, this year I'm going to be before the legislative committees 10 times over a 6-week period, defending that budget, and then it'll move into negotiating that budget with the legislature. Sometimes with him in the room, sometimes without the governor in the room, but within the parameters of what he sets. And then once that budget is signed on June, whatever the date will be, it won't be July, it will be June something this year. But then implementing that budget to make sure that the policies we had, that the departments, are not only my Department of Treasury, but the other departments are implementing the policies and monitoring throughout the year that if fiscal situations change and we don't have as much money as we thought, figuring out ways to rebring the budget back into balance during the year. So it's an ongoing process. I mean, almost the day we finish this budget, we will all almost start immediately on trying to figure out the next budget.
There's been a lot of controversy with cuts to higher education, privatizing the turnpike. Do you rank those high on the list of issues that are causing the most controversy, or do you see anything else in the future that you consider a challenge? Well,
the toll road plan clearly was the most controversial, and the governor has already said, clearly his vision of what his proposal doesn't have the support. There have been other legislators that have come up with different plans that don't necessarily meet all the goals of the governor's. And I think the governor's first goal and my goal right now is to get this budget done. And then after that, we'll have a discussion about the long-term fiscal situation between infrastructure and debt, and we'll deal with that after this budget is solved. But again, I mean, there's so many areas of this budget that are important. I mean, people don't realize that, people say run government like a business. Well, 75% of the money that we get into government goes back out, whether it goes back out to higher education through either support for the colleges or through tuition assistance, whether it goes back to municipalities in the form of property tax relief, whether it goes back to school districts, a third of our budget goes back to school districts, whether it goes back in forms of Medicaid payments, prescription drug payments for people, group homes for the development. 75% of our budget goes back out. You cannot find me a business that takes 75% of their money and gives it away to other people, because that business won't be.
That's a good point.
It won't be in business. Our business of government, the core infrastructure of government, is maybe $4 to $5 billion of the $33 billion. So, so every year, I mean, higher ed. I mean, higher ed is important. Hospitals. I mean, this year when we decided that we had to cut, our goal was to try to make sure that the cuts among those big sectors, higher ed, hospitals, municipalities, rebates, were proportional. And I think that we achieved that goal. People won't agree with all the cuts we made within those areas of higher ed. They might say, we want to do something different. But I think we just can't, we can't spend the money that we don't have. And I know that, I think there is, that I think we don't like. The governor and I don't, he doesn't like doing a speech where he had to talk about, a roughly 10% cut in operating support for the colleges. He didn't like giving us, he would rather be up there giving a speech, about, increasing support for colleges, increasing, tuition assistance, right, increasing municipal aid, increasing those things. But it's just not, if we don't have the money, we can't do it, and we're not going to continue to just, we can't print money like the federal government can, and we're not going to go back to the ways of the past about doing gimmicks and et cetera, simply to take its short-term gain.
Do you see something like cuts to the Department of Personnel actually dissolving the Department of Personnel something that's actually feasible?
Yeah, something like the Department of Personnel is I'm not going to use the word easy. Nothing is ever easy, but when there's actually when I went before the Legislative Budget Committees on this, I spent 2.5 hours on the 3 consolidations, which were the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Personnel, and the Department of Commerce. 2 hours and 25 minutes of that probably was agriculture. And the other 5 minutes, if even that, was maybe commerce, and I'm not sure if there were any questions on personnel. It's clearly a function that can be absorbed within other areas of government. We will still do it. We will still have personnel management. We will still have to do testing and et cetera. But we will do it within, we won't have a commissioner. And what you save by that is you don't save a ton of money, but you save, the more visible things of getting rid of a commissioner, getting rid of an assistant commissioner, getting rid of a public information officer, getting rid of a legislative liaison, getting rid of a commissioner's car. It's that type of thing. But the functions that are there will still continue because they need to continue.
Lastly, do you foresee a balanced budget in the near future?
Yeah, we will have. I mean, this government. We will. In the next 8 weeks, we will sit down with the legislature, and I believe that we won't see a repeat of 2006, where we went past the deadline without a budget. Last year, we set some reforms into process that will help make sure that we know where the problems are earlier. And I think that by the middle of June, basically, it's 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, I would say that by 2 months from now, by June, whatever it is, June 24th, I would hope even earlier than that we'll have a budget for fiscal year 2010. Then, as again, I said, we start looking at 2009, and then we start looking at 2010 again, and we still have structural problems where our recurring revenues, the ongoing revenues that we get every year, don't meet our ongoing needs, and we're going to have to again next year, without doing something to debt service or something like that. And it's this governor has also said there will be no tax increases because the people can't afford it, and the economy couldn't afford it right now.
How about the debt?
Well, I think we have to clearly look at something to try to pay down debt. The governor put his proposal out there that would have cut debt by 50%. It was rejected. Whether or not there's some plan that somebody will come up with that will fund infrastructure needs for 10 to 20 years instead of 75 years and make a dent in our debt service, even if we just make a $300 or $400 million dent in our debt service, that basically means that the worst $300 or $400 million of cuts we would have to make in the 2010 budget wouldn't have to be made. If the governor's plan had been adopted back in March, as he originally planned, we would have had $500 or $600 million of debt service savings in this current budget that we're now debating, and that would have meant that the worst $500 million, and different people would have different views on what the worst $500 million was. People in the higher education community would have said it's higher ed, people other places would have said that worst $500 million wouldn't have been made because we would have been able to cut debt service instead. The plan was rejected, and we didn't have that, so we had to deal with the cards we were dealt. And we proposed what we believe was the best budget, and we will have it, and then we'll move on to next year, and hopefully that when people see that, hey, we really did implement these cuts, that maybe people's attitudes will change on looking for something to cut to work on debt service.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to sit here and discuss the issues and the budget. And that's all the time we have for this week's show. I'm Nicholas Balassi, and thanks for watching.